So welcome everyone. Kevin Gooch here, the chairman of the 100 Black Men of Atlanta, Inc. And on behalf of our members, we would like to welcome you to this very important discussion on post-election social justice reform. This event is brought to you by the 100 Black Men of Atlanta. A little bit about the organization. We have a membership roster that begins with Hammer and Hank Aaron and ends with Ambassador Andrew Young, with a lot of legends and titans of industry in between, including a couple of our panelists tonight, and Justin Miller and Chris Stewart. We are an organization that is 34 years old, and we are focused on mentoring young people in our community. We spend a lot of time over at Best Academy High School, working with the young men over there, which is a single gender Atlanta public school, working with them on character development sessions, life skills training, exposure to different cultural experiences. We have our 100 Robotics Alliance, which is a partnership with Dr. Lonnie Johnson, the inventor of the Super Soaker, and a brother that has helped send spaceships into outer space, worked at the NASA Jet Propulsion Laboratory. And over at the 100 Robotics Alliance, we teach young people how to build robots. In middle school, they build robots with Legos. In high school, they build real robots that compete in various competitions around the region and the country. We recently received an incredible award from Mutual of America as their nonprofit of the year. And we have a great video that they prepared. If you want to check that out, please go to our website. You can learn more about our organization there. One line from the video that stands out to me about the Robotics Center is that we don't use young people to build robots. We use robots to build young people, and teach them how to present, teach them how to deal with conflict resolution, and really teach them how to be analytical thinkers. We also have our Collegiate 100 program, where we mentor college students across the city at multiple schools: Morehouse, Spelman, Georgia State, Oglethorpe University, Emory, Georgia Tech. And we also have our Young Professional Auxiliary, which is the Emerging 100 of Atlanta. And they do a great deal of work in the community. And they do a lot of mentoring over at Best Academy. So we just really try to make a difference in our community, because what they see is what they will be. And we like to set the example for young people that are often left behind and vulnerable. And so, again, go to our website for more information about the organization. Tonight, we have a great panel that is here to have this discussion around social justice reforms in this era after the election, after the votes have been cast. We will be led tonight by Bakari Sellers. He will lead this discussion, but he is running a few minutes behind. He got pulled in to a live broadcast, and he said he will join us as soon as that wraps up. So in the meantime, you have myself and Joseph Wilson, former Emerging 100 member and now member of the 100 Black Men of Atlanta, to help guide us through this conversation. And we will get started with an introduction of the panelists. Our first panelist, Justin Miller, is a partner at the law firm of Stewart, Miller and Simmons, where he practices civil rights law and personal injury law. Justin is a Morehouse man, graduate of Morehouse College and St. John's University Law School. Prior to joining Stewart, Miller and Simmons, Justin was a partner at the largest personal injury law firm in the nation. He's a proud member of Kappa Alpha Psi Fraternity Incorporated. Justin was recently thrust into the midst of the civil rights arena, along with his partner, Chris Stewart, when they were engaged to represent the family of Rayshard Brooks and daughter of George Floyd, Gianna.
Thank you. Happy to be here. Look forward to speaking about these issues.
All right. Joe?
Next up, we have Chris Stewart. Chris is a partner at Stewart, Miller and Simmons, and is a nationally known civil rights attorney that has, in addition to representing the family of Rayshard Brooks and Gianna Floyd, represented the Walter Scott family in South Carolina, the Alton Sterling family in Louisiana, and the Ahmaud Arbery family in Brunswick, Georgia. Chris is a proud graduate of Xavier University in Louisiana, as well as Howard University School of Law. Welcome, Chris.
Thanks for having me.
Next up, we have Ms. Joyette Holmes. Joyette worked as a prosecutor, a defense attorney, and a magistrate court judge in Cobb County, Georgia. In 2019, Joyette was appointed the first African-American woman to serve as DA in Cobb County by Governor Brian Kemp. After the tragedy that struck in Brunswick, Georgia with the death of Ahmaud Arbery, Joyette was selected to serve as special prosecutor in that case. She is a graduate of UGA, Go Dogs, and the University of Baltimore School of Law.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for having me and being a part of this conversation.
And last but not least, we have Dr. Cedric Alexander. Dr. Alexander is a law enforcement expert with over 40 years in public safety. He has served as the Chief of Police and Public Safety Director in DeKalb County, Georgia, and a former president of NOBLE, the National Organization of Black Law Enforcement Executives. You can currently find him providing commentary on police community relations to national media networks like CNN and other channels all over the country. Dr. Alexander received his doctorate from Wright State, as well as his postdoctorate studies were done at the University of Rochester. Welcome, Dr. Alexander.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. And yo, Justin.
And Chris and Joe.
Oh, okay. Okay. All right.
And for the rattlers out there, Dr. Alexander went to FAMU as well. So
All right. All right.
a lot of connections around here.
Oh,
All right,
yeah.
so tonight what we're gonna do is we're gonna have a discussion and then we'll save a few minutes for Q&A. So if you wanna use the Q&A function, if you are registered and on the Zoom chat, you can log your questions in the Q&A section and we'll try to get to a few of those at the end. But right now, let's jump into the discussion. So today we have a diverse panel with 2 civil rights attorneys and 2 representatives of law enforcement. Let's start with a question around your role in the criminal justice system. Ms. Holmes, how do you see your role in the criminal justice system as a former prosecutor and a magistrate judge?
So, I take every piece of what I've done in the criminal justice system to do the work that I've been doing. When I talk to people, I talk about the role of a prosecutor and it being a minister of justice. And I don't know that I could fully appreciate what that meant, but for having served as a defense attorney privately and for indigent defendants, as well as serving as a judge. Because we know that when we do things the right way, that we are supposed to be worried about matters related to public safety, which does not always mean a conviction. You hear those prosecutors who say, well, my win percentage is this. And that's not how we should lead in the world of criminal justice, no matter how you serve in that world. And so when I look at my role in the criminal justice system as a prosecutor, as the district attorney, I look at it and I treat it and I serve as a minister of justice and make sure that we are doing the right things by having the right conversations. And once we have those conversations and people understand what it means outside of looking for a conviction, having people think that our clients are law enforcement or the victims, they're not. The clients are the law and the right result in finding justice.
Thank you for that, Attorney Holmes. Dr. Alexander, tell us, how do you see the role of police in the criminal justice system? What should be the goal of police, and what is their philosophy, your philosophy on administering justice?
Well, we know historically the story behind policing, particularly in this country, and particularly in communities of color. The bigger question today now that I'm in this different place as being an active duty chief, but one that's out in the community and across this country talking about police reform. And that's where we are today. It's all about reformation. And one of the biggest questions that keeps coming up for me, I'm continuing to ask, and people are asking me, is what do we need police for? And it's not based on the premise that we don't need police. It's based on the premise, how do we begin to start thinking about police differently? Because if we look over recent years, in particular, in these very recent years, and even as recent as May 25th, 2020 of this year, we can go on and we can talk about those horrible events. But what people want to know today, what do we need police for? What do they really need to be doing? What should be their function? Should they be dealing with mental health, homelessness, and domestic violence, and all these social ills that we know are plaguing our communities? And my answer to that, quite frankly, we're going to have to revisit policing. We're going to have to look at reform in a way that's going to match up to what communities want, not necessarily to what I may want as a chief. But even though my expertise may have value, I think one component that we have missed, and I think we really have to focus on, and that's communities in which we serve, because oftentimes many communities know better about what they need than what we do. But we need to look at policing, and everything's on the table for as I'm concerned.
All right, thank you for that, Dr. Alexander. Chris and Justin, what is your role in the criminal justice system, and how do you serve that role on a day-to-day basis?
I mean, it's really just speaking up for those who aren't able to speak up for themselves. You know, whether that's from a civil rights case where somebody has had their life taken by law enforcement when it shouldn't have occurred, or whether it's from a young Black male killed at an apartment complex that, you know, didn't provide security at that complex. You know, we deal with both of those situations daily. And so we just try and be a voice for the voiceless. And a lot of times people may not want to hear what we have to say, because it always involves change or doing something better. But, you know, that's just the balance of society.
And we also speak to a lot of people who don't have access to lawyers, who don't know DAs, who don't know police officers. And we let them know that you need those people on your side. We need people that look like us in those positions. And so a lot of our clients, they've never met any of these people. They don't understand that, you know, Black folks need to be seen in the DA's office too. And so we do a lot of speaking and a lot of talking to let people know that we need help on the inside, so to speak. And so I think that's a big part of what we're doing. And we've been doing a lot of that since May 25th, Dr. Alexander.
So we asked Dr. Alexander, and we heard from Ms. Holmes, their philosophy on administering justice. What is it that drives you guys to do what you do on a daily basis? Like, what is it that motivates you to fight this fight, get these death threats, and get, you know, this incoming fire? What motivates you to do that?
Somebody has to. You know, that's simple. As simple as that. I mean, somebody's got to. And when you don't get caught in all of the BS that surrounds it, I mean, it's very easy to fix. You know, policing, the changes that need to happen, it's really simple to fix. We just make it complicated because people don't want to lose power, or, you know, some people just don't like change, and some people, you know, like the attention. But I mean, it's really simple to fix. So that's why it's frustrating, because the changes that need to be implemented can be easily done, you know, but it's more about power and just how the system is always operated.
You know, you know, on top of that too, Kevin, in terms of what Chris is saying, that's very true. A lot of this stuff is really over convoluted, but it's not complicated. It really is, at the end of the day, about doing what's right, doing what's right by the people in which we serve. You know, sometimes I'm not very popular with other chiefs across this country because my approach around these issues, that particularly those that affect communities of color, which in most cases is generally the case, we have to take a stand. We have to stand up for something that's right. All of us, regardless of who we are, that are inside and outside the criminal justice system. Because those of us that are on this panel, and hundreds and thousands of us that are across this country doing this work tonight as active duty members, we have a responsibility at this point in time in America's history to do something very different around criminal justice as a whole and around policing very specifically. But you just cannot change police by itself without us looking at the entire criminal justice system, because they're interconnected. And understanding that sometimes it can appear to be complex. I don't really think it's that complex. I just think it's really oftentimes become more difficult for the same reasons that Chris just named. We have to get out of our own way, move our ego, and do right for the people in which we serve. And at the end of the day, it's just that simple. It's not complicated. It's convoluted, but it's not complicated.
Right. I would agree that it's not complicated. There are some aspects where it can be about the power and not willing to lose the power, but you have to educate. And sometimes that takes a little longer than beating someone down with what it is that has to be done. Because look, when we just do that and people aren't doing it from the right space, we're going to come back full circle and be having these conversations again. But when we are willing to slow down and educate on, you know, a lot of people don't know where policing kind of started. A lot of people don't know what it is that as a district attorney, I do outside of the walls of the courthouse that make a difference inside, that make a difference with the recommendations that are going out with cases, that make a difference for those who deserve second chances to get them. And when people don't understand the process or the why, they never do better. And I am but one person, and we are but one office. And so we have to be sure that we are telling people the why so that we know the where that we go. Because I know I want the where to be a place where we are trusting of our law enforcement or our public safety communities, that the people who are speaking out on the civil rights side of the house are trusted to want better for the whole and not just for the one particular person that they may be serving in that particular case. But we all have to play a part of that. And that does require education. It does require a slowdown for the moment so that we can do what needs to be done in the future. So we're not having the conversation about what the community needs, which I don't always know, which Chris doesn't always know, which Dr. Alexander doesn't always know, unless we are in the community, talking to the community and seeing how it is that they have not been served, the things that we are missing, the blind spots that we have because of the area that we're serving from, because we all have those blind spots. I know I do. And I try to educate myself where I have those blind spots. So I'm doing right by the next person that represents a file that crosses my desk, the next family that comes in who has an issue and has been impacted from a criminal justice perspective, whether it's as a victim or a defendant or their family. So education is an important part of what inspires me, of what pushes me, of what makes me want to continue in this space. And it doesn't matter the position, because in the end, it's about that mission to serve and make the criminal justice system a place of trust, equality, and just, you know, where people aren't constantly feeling on the outside of it. I know a lot of people want to be on the outside of it, but we are all in partnership to make this thing better, whether we are directly impacted or not.
That's a beautiful segue to the next question about some specifics. Joe, you want to take this one?
Sure. You all have different perspectives on your role in the criminal justice system. Ms. Holmes and Dr. Alexander, given your experiences in the criminal justice system, and again, we know that no system is perfect, but what are 2 or 3 specific areas where you think reform should begin being made in our criminal justice system?
Well, it's really a lot of them, because there's no 1 or 2 specific ones, but for the purpose of this conversation tonight, let me talk about something I think that is hugely important. We have to begin to think about who it is that we're recruiting to become police officers. And I think that also once we recruit them, is how they're being trained, is how they're being supervised, is how they're being managed. But let's go back to the whole piece just around recruitment itself. I can very easily go out, recruit police officers, take a look at and see what their criminal background may have been, and look at their driving record, their credit scores, et cetera, et cetera. And if they pass all those very simple tests, as far as I'm concerned, then they're allowed into police departments to complete whatever background and training there is. But I think we got to go deeper. We got to know more about who the individuals are that we're bringing into our police agencies. We got to assess them. We got to know if they have a sense for human life, if they have compassion for people. Because what we saw on May 25th, what we saw was an individual who was totally had no passion whatsoever for human life, even as the man begged for his breath. Now, I would guarantee you, having been someone in this profession for a very long time and having been a practicing psychologist, whatever was going on with Siobhan that day, he has demonstrated those behaviors somewhere else, maybe not as egregious, but they were demonstrated in other places. And the unfortunate part about that is he was allowed to be able to stay inside a larger system and not be managed, not be reprimanded, not call the attention to these behaviors which somehow live inside some of these police departments, unfortunately, across the country. Not in all, because we don't want to paint everyone with the same brush, but we do have a problem here. And the problem here is that we got to look inside our culture. We got to recruit the right people. Then we got to train them. We got to go back and look at our training protocols and apparatus in terms of how we're training. We got to determine what calls of service we want police officers to respond to and be held accountable for. Because there's verging, we have this change going on at this very moment around police reform in this country. And people are very serious about it. And the conversations are taking place all around the country. So when we recruit, we train, and then we have to supervise. But let me say this about training, and I'm gonna stop. One of the most important things is it's not just about de-escalation training, diversity training, all these trainings, the terms which we become so familiar with. It's really building that training into the fabric of those organizations. I can go to training and check the box and say, okay, I've had de-escalation training, but when it comes time to employ those techniques, I don't. So there needs to be supervisors who are present on the scene, supervisors who are there with their men and women when they take these calls, so that they can evaluate what it is that they learn and be able to step back with them and say, here's what you did great, and here's what we can do better. So we have to do more than just train. Training has to become a part of the fabric of that organization, and we have to be able to assess it. And one way we assess that training is through our evaluation process. Those are just a few of the things. There are many others. And largely, as far as I'm concerned, we got to be very, very, I think, specific about the kind of people we bring into our police agencies, because number one, I can teach you how to run, to shoot, to fight, do all those things. But what I cannot teach you is how to have compassion for people. That's something that you're born with, and that's something that you learn in your family of origin or in your communities, but I cannot teach you that. You have to come already equipped with it, and we need to assess it and make sure that people have it regardless of who they are, white or black, men or women, because that's the critical part of being a guardian in a community and not being there with a warrior mindset.
To piggyback on what Dr. Alexander was saying, I think that one of the main things we need, and what we're seeing in these incidents that we've seen all across the country, George Floyd, Rayshard Brooks, not so much Ahmaud Arbery, but those two specifically, is that the officers are not a part of our community. So they don't participate in our community. They don't know people from our community. They don't, when they interact with the person, they don't know that this is probably how this guy moves around. This is not an abnormal thing. He's not trying to kill you. He is jittery because he's a jittery person, instead of him being jittery because he's trying to do something to you, automatically thinking that is what is causing a lot of these incidents to kind of spark. And so I believe that these officers should, before they're allowed on the street, whatever system, whatever place that they are policing, they should have to go and work in that community at a community center, or at a home for, a shelter or something for the homeless, or something where they get that interaction with the community and they know the people that they're policing a little bit better than some of these guys who just get out here, get put in the hood, and then don't know what they're dealing with and get scared. I think that nervousness is causing a lot of issues to start that didn't necessarily have to start.
So Ms. Holmes, we got some feedback on sort of the front line with the police. What about in the criminal justice system? What are 2 or 3 areas where you think reforms should be made?
Well, the biggest one for me is just culture, because I don't think the culture of prosecutors' offices has been to be out in the community and actually learn about the communities that they serve. Because if you have never done anything, whether it's be educated, be involved in athletics or anything else in a community that doesn't look like your own, and the first time and the times that you deal with people are in a courtroom, then you are always going to associate a Black female with a courtroom, if that's the only place you have dealt with a Black female. When I first started practicing in the courtrooms, I was never the attorney. I was the mother of the defendant, and maybe at best, the probation officer in the courtroom. And so when you have prosecutors who are making decisions about people's life based on the charge and the recommendations, and you have never had a perspective for what somebody else's life was, then the work that gets done does not get done the right way. I always go back to an experience I had when I was an assistant solicitor. And one of the prosecutors, white male prosecutor, was mad because he didn't think that the co-defendant in a case was telling the truth. And what the co-defendant said was, I don't know who that was in the back seat. I only know him as Slim. And for that prosecutor, he could not imagine a circumstance where you would have somebody in a car with you that you didn't know their first and last name. But we know oftentimes that happens in communities of color, in communities, quite frankly, I can't even say that. But we know that happens all the time, where you might not know the first and last name or whose mother or what church that somebody went to who's riding with you, because you know their cousin, and their cousin is going to give you a ride to the store. But he would not give that person the benefit and was recommending a jail sentence based on the fact that he thought he was obstructing after the fact and wanted to add a charge to the accusation. But he just didn't understand. I shouldn't say he just didn't understand. He was ignorant and didn't want to be informed or educated as to why that might be a circumstance outside of his perspective, because he hadn't experienced it. So the culture in a space, especially in prosecutor's office, makes a difference. When we sat down in our office and had those tough conversations about what it is you've seen, why you're making those recommendations, and why you should be looking at it differently, it made all the difference for some of the things that were being recommended in the office that I led. The culture has to change. People have to, like I think it was Justin said, going into the community centers, serving in those community centers where they are going to be working, where they are going to be meeting the face that doesn't look like theirs, the economic situation that they didn't experience, the hardships, or just not seeing what we may have seen going through college, through law school, through doctorate programs, through master's programs, that everybody hasn't had the opportunity to see. But those are hard conversations to say that you've been working in an office for 20 years and the culture needs to change. But well, it's a conversation that has to happen to make a difference for the criminal justice system within the walls of the courthouse.
And as a follow-up to that, to you and Dr. Alexander, what are some common misconceptions that you encounter that right now you want to sort of debunk about being a prosecutor or about being on the front lines and being a police officer?
Well, I think for police officers, as difficult it is today, in light of everything that we see going on, I would hope, and always say this, that I hope, even in spite of a lot of the feelings that people have around policing today in their communities across this country, there are people who certainly have some very strong resentment towards a lot of what they've seen and visualized over and over and over again. It has been hurtful, it has been traumatic, it has been painful to the American people, particularly communities of color, because they've seen these scenarios over and over and over and over again. And it's sadness, and it's frightening, and it's traumatic to all of us. Mm-hmm. But I would hope that people would keep in mind there are a lot of good police officers out there tonight, men and women who are really about doing the right thing, and prosecutors who are about doing the right thing, and making sure that The US Constitution is delivered to the American people equally. But do we have challenges within the ranks of policing in this country? Yes, we do. And I'm not going to minimize it one bit. But I do know this. There are a lot of men and women across this country today who really go out there and they do a great job. But I think it becomes important for us to be involved in our police departments and our communities. Make it our business to be involved. Do not accept what is just told to you, but look inside, go to your elected officials, go to your chiefs and your sheriffs, because those police departments don't belong to me as a chief. They belong to you. They're there to serve you. And it's a partnership. But I hope that the American people and those that are watching tonight, as tough as a lot of these incidents that we see, we know this. We know that we need police, and we know that there are bad people in the world. And we got to have police in order to bring them to justice, but to do it fairly and equitably, and to bring them before a larger judicial system that is going to treat them fairly and judiciously. But with all that being said, I would hope that people keep that in mind. There are a lot of good men and women out there that serve. And those that are not doing what they're supposed to be doing, yes, we're going to hold them accountable. Mm-hmm. I'm going to hold them accountable being a civilian doing what I'm doing across this country every day, talking about reform and how it's going to benefit both police and how it's going to benefit community, because they're partners. And you cannot have good public safety with one and not without the other. But there's a lot of different things that's going to have to change. And I will go back to what I said at the top of this show, is that we have to begin to ask this question: what do we need police for? That's the jumping off point. Those are the conversations that are going to need to take place across the country. What do we need them in our community? And each community may need something very different. And I don't think it's one thing fits all, because how you police in DeKalb County, Georgia tonight may be very different than how you police in Butte, Montana, two entirely different communities.
Yeah, I think from a prosecutor's perspective, that the biggest misconception is just that we are 100% punitive and don't consider other options. When people hear about prosecutors' offices, it's often from a soundbite in a news program or a paragraph in a newspaper, and they have not seen or heard the 18 months worth of motions and back and forth filings about the total facts of the case and what has gone into making the recommendation that is made. Another would probably be that we don't hold accountable those prosecutors or even those members of law enforcement who don't do the right thing. And we do. We've made decisions on cases where, as a prosecutor's office, we know that law enforcement doesn't like what we have ultimately done in a case. But we've done that again because our client is the law, our client is justice, our client's not law enforcement, our client's not even the victim in cases sometimes. But so those are two things that I think people only think of us dealing on the punishment side and not the restoration side, or even the opportunities to educate and do the upfront teaching so that we don't see people in the criminal justice system. And then just that we don't hold accountable those who need to be held accountable from law enforcement, or even from somebody who has called in a crime and later been listed as a victim who very well may not have been. But we do, because we're intentional about that work and making sure that that gets done when it needs to be done.
So
Thank you.
Oh, thank you.
Oh, go ahead, Joe.
Yes. So we all know and understand that there's a lot of division and distrust that exists when it comes to the Black community with respect to law enforcement. The question I have is it time to defund the police and shift those dollars to addressing systemic issues in these communities? And if so, what does that actually look like? And that's for the entire panel.
Yeah. I mean, whatever term you want to use, defund, reallocate, reinvest, whatever it is, I don't care. My thing is the end result. And cities are doing it all around the country. I mean, Minneapolis just approved moving $8 million to create a mental health section for law enforcement that'll respond to the mental health issues, that will increase some of the inner city activities that'll build the trust and stuff that Justin was talking about. A couple other cities have done that also. So, all that was done without losing a single police officer, because the hard fact is, I mean, we do need police officers. I mean, come on, your house get broken into at 3 a.m. You're calling 911. You're not calling your homeboy. So we need law enforcement, but we need law enforcement that do their job. And so, we also need, as Dr. Alexander hit it right on the head, they don't need to be responding to half the stuff that they're responding to. If there's a mental health issue or homeless or domestic, just whatever it is, there are specialized people that can respond to those, instead of having an armed officer immediately, just by their presence of being there and being aggressive and having a gun, heightening the situation. So, like I said, my thing is always end result, not, what's hot at the moment, because after a while, everybody's right now on civil rights. If COVID wasn't around, half of us would have already moved on with our life. I thought the world was going to change with Walter Scott, and then everybody disappeared. And so, we just got to keep pushing and making sure we're following through with a lot of the stuff that we're asking for.
And we keep, Chris and I, we talk about this all the time as we go from community to community and deal with the same exact issues. The defunding of the police department, just defunding it and not reallocating it and not putting those resources into something else is ridiculous. But I think that the semantics of it are really less important. And what's more important is where those dollars go. So if a community has, 2 tanks, and another community, 2 counties over needs a tank, I mean, if you can drive that tank there and get it there within a reasonable amount of time, then maybe we don't spend money on a tank in community number 2. And you take that money and you pay the police officers more in that community. Maybe you can get better police officers like Dr. Alexander was talking about in the beginning, because that is, where you start from is where you finish. That's your base. So we should probably be paying them a little bit more and valuing and giving them kudos for better service to the community. And the only way we can do a lot of those things is to reallocate the money that we have spent on policing our cities, like we're in Fallujah or Iraq. So I think defunding the police, I think that whole movement is a good movement. I think we need to explain it better because I think that reallocate is a better use of terminology for that operation.
Yeah, and I agree with that, because what happened when the term became very popularized here in recent months, it became very politicized during this presidential election as well. When I first heard the term defund, for me as a former chief, it means to me that you're taking all my money away from me, but you're asking me to provide public service or public safety, and that doesn't work. So the term got hijacked. It got politicized, but I agree with Chris in the fact that whatever we want to call it, whatever the adjective you want to use, defund, redirect, whatever the case may happen to be, we have to look at, here again, what it is we want police to do. But I think we have to even go a step further. Here again, when we talk about if we're going to reform police in some sort of way, or revisit how we police in our communities across this country, we're going to have to be very clear about what it is we want our men and women in blue to do. We're going to have to train them well. We're going to have to hold them accountable. And we're going to have to make sure, here again, that whatever it is that we're doing around reform, it has to be woven into the fabric of that organization. Because what also is very important, when people hear this whole code of blue silence thing, which does not exist. But in the minds of many people, I understand how they get that perception, because there are police officers out there, quite frankly, who do not like or tolerate those who are going sideways. But I think we got to do a better job of creating in our police cultures across this country opportunities for them to come forward and say that behavior is not acceptable. I'm not going to be a part of it, because one thing that police is struggling with at this very moment is its own legitimacy. And the state of Georgia can give you a gun and a badge and authority to go out and do the work that you do, but it is the people that you serve that gives you legitimacy. And without that legitimacy, your job is going to be very, very hard to do. And unfortunately, in many parts of our country, policing is struggling with maintaining its legitimacy. And of course, the current president of the United States has not done anything, quite frankly, to help along that process over the last several years that have made it easier for police officers also. It has actually become more of a problem. But we're going to get through this. And I think part of this, you will see a lot of chiefs, a lot of sheriffs across this country who are on board and who are taking the steps that they can. And you see it, and you hear about it, and you read about it, who are doing what they can from where they are to make sure that their departments are respected and the legitimacy that they deserve to have, they're able to regain it from a number of people across this country who have really lost faith in our entire criminal justice system.
The only thing I'd say, is, especially with some of the cases we've had, I mean, we've had issues with the whole code of silence thing. Mm-hmm. And, it's even gotten to the point where I've had a call from officers who wanted to speak up, mm-hmm. who wanted to say something, but they were either going to get demoted, put on a detail that's terrible, harassed, reprimanded, and even threatened, mm-hmm. If they spoke up, mm-hmm. Because of the code of silence situation, mm-hmm. which pops up. And it's one of the situations that stops a lot of the, as we agreed earlier, there are some really good officers out there, but it's almost fear-based if you try and do the right thing because of the lack of oversight, which is, just the biggest area that
right.
I would say needs reform is just oversight. I mean, you've got people in internal affairs or whatever, department. If the chief doesn't care, then, stuff happens. And as you pointed out, Derek Chauvin, who killed George Floyd, had all kind of prior incidents.
Right.
And every single one of them was okayed. He was never reprimanded, never, never held accountable for anything he did before. The officer that killed Walter Scott had the highest use of a taser in the whole department, mm-hmm. just showing his propensity for violence. Mm-hmm. But nothing was ever done to him. I mean, in every case, soon as we get the file and their history, we're like, how in the world was this guy left on the force?
Right.
And it's the oversight where I've talked to some chiefs and they need officers so bad, they're willing to take anybody. Mm-hmm. If he bounced around from police department to police department to police department, and they know he's a potential bad apple, they just need officers. Mm-hmm. But without the right oversight, then we get these cases today.
Right. And I think it becomes important for communities across the country to consider civilian oversight committees in their community, mm-hmm. to be able to look at these things and to be able to have a voice and even some influence into them. Now, there's going to be pushback, of course, in many places, particularly where you have very strong unions across the country. But it's a fight you're going to have to fight, because I think it becomes important for those who feel that they're going to be ostracized, they're going to be demeaned, they're not going to be supported if they speak up against something wrong. We got to remove that. And quite frankly, I agree with you, Chris, it starts at the top of an organization. Because if I'm a chief of that organization, I'm going to make it perfectly clear. And I'm going to build into the fabric of that department as well, too. That kind of behavior is going to get you fired, mm-hmm. if not indicted on some other charges. Because when you start lying in written statements, in written reports, you're setting yourself up and it's not to be tolerated. And policing is at a place right now in this country where we really have to take a look at ourselves and say, what's important? How we're seen, or how we are in things that we act out that's not acceptable to the community. We just can't do it anymore. We never should have been doing it. And this is why policing across this country is struggling for its own legitimacy every day, because people have seen too many of these acts, they've heard too much about them, and many of them have been quite true. So I'm not going to try here again to minimize any of it. We got a lot of work to do in American policing across this country, but I am confident and I am hopeful and optimistic enough that we'll be able to do it, because these conversations we're having tonight and the roles that you guys play as civil rights attorneys, the role that Ms. Holmes played, the role that 100 Black men play, and all of us across this country play. We have to make sure that we do our part, but we can't lay down on any of this. We have to keep our foot on the gas and continue to move reform and not lighten up whatsoever. Make sure that this incoming administration don't lighten up on these efforts, because if we do, I can assure you nothing is going to change. The only thing that we got to do is just keep our foot on the gas around these issues around reform and making things better for our communities at large.
Dr. Alexander.
Well, here's a good moment, and Justin, you can take back over in a second. But for those that are familiar with baseball, right, we're bringing in Mariano Rivera to help us close out the panel discussion. Bakari Sellers has joined us. The Morehouse man, one of the youngest state representatives in the country, Mr. While I Breathe, I Hope, the host of the Bakari Sellers podcast, and the author of My Vanishing Country, and CNN commentator. Bakari Sellers has joined us to help us finish out this panel. So thank you for joining us, Bakari, and we'll turn it over to you.
No, I was learning so much. I mean, Mrs. Holmes was killing it. Chris was all right. But Justin and Dr. Alexander were doing what they always do. Justin, I didn't mean to cut you off. I've just been sitting over here in the wings for the past few minutes, just listening and absorbing like everybody else. Justin, you were about to chime in, so I didn't want to. Go ahead.
I was just wondering, hey, Bakari, how you doing too, brother? Good to see you. I was just wondering, Dr. Alexander, you said something about the unions not giving pushback to some of these kind of changes that we've been talking about. And so my question is, you know, I don't know. Do you think the union should be pushing back this way? And do you think that that's an impediment to getting some real change out of the police departments?
Yes, it's an impediment, but we have to remember this. Unions were not formed to build relationships in communities. They were formed in order to protect the people who are members of their organization. And we have seen, all of us have seen on too many occasions, where people who should have lost their jobs somehow were negotiated back into their workplaces. But here's the bigger issue. I don't blame it all on unions, quite frankly. We also got to remember that the rights that police officers have, whether it's a state bill of rights or whatever the case may happen to be, those things were negotiated. They were negotiated by your city mayors and your city managers and your police chiefs. So it's how much territory are you willing to give up to get this in order to get that? And I think when we go back and we look at these contract negotiations with unions, these elected officials are going to have to take a much stronger stand and be able to say, here's what we're not going to be able to accept. Our communities will not accept this. So we have to negotiate. They have to negotiate these things harder, because the unions are not here to build relationships in the community. That's not their purpose. That's not who finance their organization. It is the members, and the membership look for their unions to cover them. And sometimes it doesn't play out the way that we would like for it to, because somewhere back, maybe 5, 10, 15 years ago, something not negotiated where I wanted to fire this individual, or I wanted to give them a severe punishment, but I wasn't able to because of what had been negotiated away. And we have to remember that. So, but every few years, these negotiations come up for review. And I think it becomes time for communities to be able to say to elected officials, and not just at a local level, but also at a state level, where a lot of these rules and policies are put into play. Because one thing that we got to do, we got to find a way to make sure that police officers who want to do this job right and do it constitutionally, that they have a place to do that. And those who do not, and we've seen demonstrated ills along their way of their work or histories, we got to get these people out of our system because they serve no purpose.
Dr. Alexander brought up a good point, Justin, because one of the things that we recall is after the death of Rayshard Brooks in the city of Atlanta, after he died, the Georgia State Legislature passed an Officer's Bill of Rights. The General Assembly did. So let's keep in mind how these things are working. And we've seen some of the more archaic Bill of Rights, et cetera, in southern states, but it was kind of convenient, the timing of the Georgia General Assembly. I want to get my prosecutor in here and Chris. I want you all to tag team this question. We're going to move a little rapidly as we kind of get near the end, but what are some tangible solutions? We know that the change happens on state and local level, and a lot of people are watching. And we talked about culture changes. I heard you say that, and that was brilliant. That needs to be fleshed out in a book that you're going to write soon, Ms. Holmes. I'm putting that on you already.
Okay, you are my husband.
Yeah. What are some of the tangible solutions that we can see done on a state and local level to one, improve policing, but two, rebuild trust? And I know that Chris, you've been traveling the country, not just serving your clients, but also pushing for some of these reforms. What are some of those things tangibly that you want to see done? I'll let Ms. Holmes and then Chris, I want you to tackle it, kind of tag team quickly.
So, I mean, there's a lot of things that have to be done, starting from the state house and just legislation that really protects the process so that it's not just seen as a strictly prosecutorial function. And people are like, but I mean, you're a prosecutor, what do you mean? So we're talking about things outside of just the prosecutorial function. The main purpose is public safety and justice. There is nothing that we gain from just locking everybody up, even when they have run afoul of the law, and even when sometimes they've run afoul in a pretty serious way. Because let's just say that drug addiction or mental health led them to that space. Then if they go to prison for 365 days, on the 366th day, they come home with that same mental health issue, with that same addiction. Yes, maybe they have been clean while they have been in jail, maybe, but the same things that they suffered when they were out are the things that they're going to suffer again. But even with the discretion that a prosecutor has, until there's some legislative change from the bottom to the top, not just with misdemeanor offenses, but with felony offenses, it's going to be difficult to make some of those changes. Then on the local level, I mean, like right at home, being in the community and not operating as a silo. Partnerships with community organizations, churches, nonprofits, chambers of commerce, and our other government agencies are important to share the message of what it is we do, how you can help, because we operate outside of the walls, not just within the courtroom.
Chris, some of those changes that we don't necessarily have to wait on 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue, because I'm gonna go to Dr. Alexander and Justin in a minute to talk about the Biden-Harris administration. But for you, state and locally, what are some of those things? I mean, we know banning chokeholds, those type things, but what are some of the other things that people can push today from a state and local level?
I mean, changes are important. I mean, I've been knowing Bakari so long, he didn't even have a beard and hadn't hit the weight room like he'd been doing.
I've been working. It's Corona sexy, man. You gotta get it.
That's how long I've been knowing that dude. But nah, man. I mean, man, really the same changes that we used to try and push when we were in South Carolina. Yeah. You know, with Walter Scott, it's the same conversations that we were having back then. You know, the first thing, which, you know, I think Dr. Alexander made a very good point about it, man, you get what you pay for. Like, you know, police officers making 30,000, 40,000. Most of them come in, some of them already with PTSD from serving or this or that, you know, having been an officer at different police stations. I mean, you get what you pay for, and not just pay, but the standards of what it takes to be an officer. All of that needs to be increased. You know, I've been proposing it needs to be a 2-year college to be a police officer, like a full degree. Like, I mean, you know, to fix a car, you got to go to trade school or whatever it may be. To be a doctor, to be even drive trucks, you got to go to, you know, school. But you don't have to do that to be a police officer. It's a couple weeks. And so, you know, the entire institution of the hiring has to be fixed. Secondly, it's just simple, the oversight, man. I mean, you know, we have a situation right now with officers, something happened and they just turned their body cams off. I mean, they just turned them off. Nobody got in trouble. We'll never know what happened afterwards. They literally just turned them off. And that should not be able to be, you know, to happen. I mean, that doesn't take laws. That doesn't take the president. That just takes the chief or, you know, the rules be, if you turn it off, you're fired. That's what I'm saying. A lot of this stuff is just simple. And, you know, one of the biggest things, it starts early. If you let an officer get away with a punch that wasn't needed, or a knee that wasn't needed, or macing somebody or tasering somebody, and they don't get in trouble, then don't be surprised when they kill somebody when it wasn't needed. And so if you let those little things go, then you end up with George Floyd.
Mr. Alexander and Justin, Dr. Alexander and Justin, I want to ask you all this, as we have an incoming administration now that is at least going to give us entree into the room. What are 2 or 3 things, top level things that we should be asking them? I'm a firm believer that criminal justice reform happens at the local level. But, you know, things like qualified immunity, et cetera, having a national database for bad law enforcement officers. What are some of the things that if you had the ear of Joseph Robinette Biden and Kamala Debbie Harris, you would ask them right now in the room?
Well, that's a great question. It's just ironically, myself and a number of us who were part of Obama's task force on 21st century policing, we met today via Zoom to talk about some of these issues that you're referring to. And I think, and we hope at some point we'll have an opportunity to reintroduce that document, which I'm quite sure President-elect Biden is very well familiar with, and certainly many of those that are on his team today. But I think one thing that certainly from a federal level is going to be hugely important, Bakari, is those things that you just spoke about, is being able to have some federal standardization around some of these issues that affect policing. Now, if you remember, right post George Floyd, the Republicans and the Democrats attempt to try to come up with some type of police reform measures, but they were not able to come to some reasonable agreement that worked for both sides. But I think we got to go back, and they're going to have to revisit many of these issues, because I think there needs to be some federal legislation, particularly around collecting data around bad police officers, around shootings that occur in this country, and around a variety, I think, of things that affect in a negative way cultural policing, but there's no accountability built in. But until that happens, as I have written so many times before, I think at a local level, a lot of these ideals can still be employed, but it's going to take good leadership from the top of any organization. And leadership is huge. And the leadership piece, and that's something we were talking about today, the leadership piece is to make sure that we have chiefs and sheriffs across this country we also are providing them with the kind of training and that they need, not just the men and women on the street, but also at the top of those organizations as well. It's hugely important that we get involved. And hopefully this administration, and I'm quite confident that they're going to, once they get themselves in and get settled, we're going to hear more about reform.
Justin, you
muted, Justin.
There are 5 things that we've kind of been pushing, and that I think that, you know, a lot of people have been talking about, but are very important. One of them is ending qualified immunity. We all know how bad that is. That is allowing a lot of police officers to get off and get away with stuff. A lot of cities do not hold their police officers accountable because they know that they are going to get off, and then there will be no kind of punishment coming on the back end. And so we have to end qualified immunity immediately. We have to ban chokeholds because there are lots of other options and ways to get the job done that do not kill people. And if you're accidentally killing people, like many of them, all of them saying they're not doing it on purpose, they're accidentally killing people, then we need to stop chokeholds and not have that as a part of their kit when they're out in the streets dealing with the community. I think we need to mandate the community service piece, like I was talking about earlier, making sure that those police officers have contacts with the community. Before they get out there policing people, they need to know who we are, who our kids are. They need to know where we go to church and where we hang out and where we go to hoop. They need to know all of these things before they get out there with a baton and a taser and a gun and the ability and the force and the state backing them to be able to do to you whatever they want to do to you. They need to allocate more funds to the police departments as well, so that, like Dr. Alexander said, we can hire and retain better people. And Chris said the same thing. More funds will equal more training, better candidates, and that equals people making better decisions on the street. And then the last thing I would say is a national registry, just to make sure that they can't hop from department to department when they're found out. We need to make sure that we can look them up, we know who they are, and that they will never be in law enforcement again, so that these things do not pop up when Chris and I look at their file and we see that they've done this 3 times and on the 4th time they killed somebody. So those things I think will go very far in helping policing immediately. Those are immediate things that can happen that this administration can do.
You know, I have been watching the work of both you and Chris for a long period of time, admired it, because you guys are, you know, you literally are the civil rights attorneys of our generation, and the same lineage of the Johnny Cochrans and Thurgood Marshalls, et cetera. And Dr. Alexander, your work, it oftentimes just goes thankless, and we need to do a better job of thanking you for your service and being somebody who leads by example. Ms. Holmes, I wanted to ask you a question though. When you walk into the courtroom, you oftentimes are the most powerful person in that courtroom. And I think that sometimes we don't understand the power that prosecutors have. Can you talk to us about just fundamentally some of the things that you see? And I know you answered this question about distrust a little bit earlier and changing the culture a little bit earlier. But being in that position and working with the individuals you see here, what are some of the things that we as a community can do to empower you? Not necessarily what you need to change or your office needs to change, but the 100 Black men, the people that are watching, what are some of the things that we can do to empower you in your daily work every single day to help us on our end rebuild that trust?
Well, I'll say from a political perspective, to take politics out of it. It should not, anything dealing with the criminal justice system should not be put in this space of politics, especially partisan politics. That's number one, because over this last year, politics have definitely clouded what we've been able to do and doing it in the right way. Another thing is just being a part of a community program where when we need to place people so that they're not placed in the penitentiary or in the jails or even on long-term community supervision, that we have placements. You know, one of the things that has worked for us that I know can continue to empower our offices and offices across the country are just having those groups that step up and say, hey, we want to mentor young men. So when you feel like you don't have an option for that young man outside of community supervision, jail, or the penitentiary, we got them. There are organizations that did that in the last 6 months, Game Changers out of Marietta, the Zone, which helped us with those cases where there were substance use disorders. A lot of other organizations, Operation Snatchback in Powder Springs and Austell and Mableton. Just being community organizations that say, hey, I'm not gonna always be critical, but I see how we can help. I see how we can drive more trust from the perspective of our community and what we are doing so that we can serve in this space. That's what has helped us over the last several months, are having the churches and the nonprofits and the chambers of commerce step in. Because when you have those conversations about, this is not just a behind the bench, behind the courtroom table type work. This is work all of us have to do. And when you have, I mean, people own businesses. They want their businesses to be secure. When they understand that having their business secure doesn't always mean that the person who vandalized it has to go to prison, but has this other option, it makes a difference. So you empower the work that we do by taking the politics out of it, by understanding we are all members of a community who decided to live, raise our family, work, and play there. And we want that public safety to mean something different than just what people know of as prosecution. So those are the things for me that I have sought in our community to make a difference and that have empowered me to do the work outside of the challenges that partisan politics has brought to certain issues.
Thank you for that. My job is to come in and close it out a little bit and now turn it back over to Kevin Gooch, who will give us one final question. Again, Dr. Alexander, Justin, Chris, Mrs. Holmes, I truly love and adore you from my perch and my platform, and just want to say thank you so much for all the work that you have done, all the work that you are doing, and all the work that you will do.
Thank you.
Thank you for what you're doing, Bakari.
Just want an autograph.
Right.
Thank you, Bakari. I think this question, I think each one of you may have a little bit to say on this question. What is a reasonable expectation for reform with regard to unions and liability of police officers that have done egregious things, but with immunity? Will civil suits weed out depravity? Please also speak to new weed reform, whereby legalization changes incarceration.
Well, let me.
Let's say we're doing the civil rights part or the weed part first.
Let's do the police unions, dealing with police unions and liability of officers, and how can we make that a sort of deterrent for bad behavior by police officers?
Well, I think those of you in the civil rights community and who are doing a tremendous job out here standing up for American citizens of across this entire country, I would say to you, keep doing what you're doing, because that's what's going to make the difference. When you start picking in people's pocketbooks, and when people see that they can have some personal liability to some of these egregious acts that we're seeing, you're going to see a change in behavior, you're going to see a change in policy. But we can no longer, and quite frankly, these cities can no longer continue to afford to pay for the reckless behavior of a few. And there is no accountability held on their part. Virtually in every profession that's out there, we all have to have some type of liability insurance, if you will. I understand from a police perspective why this has been challenging to police on many different levels, but we're going into a whole new era now of reform across this country. And here again, like I said at the top of this show, everything is on the table, everything needs to be discussed, and everything need to be brought to some resolve. And because we used to do something one way does not mean that we cannot have conversations and discuss how we can begin to do them differently. I don't know the answers to any of this, quite frankly, but I do know is that I'm going to hope that you guys, you gentlemen, continue to do the work that you're doing and bringing these issues to light for the American people across this nation. And as it relates to marijuana reform, look, the world is changing and American people are speaking in terms of how they think about it. And at the end of the day, for me, that's all that matters. And police are going to enforce what you're given to enforce. But quite frankly, some of these minuscule and minor infractions are creating an environment, and I think putting a lot of people on the pathway for jail and for prison, because you know some of this stuff that we're out here messing with folks around just don't, messing with folks over the small amounts of marijuana, quite frankly, just really doesn't make any sense. And then it begins to feel like harassment, to be quite frank with you. But here again, I don't know the answer, but what I do know, I want people at the table. I want us to have these conversations, and communities and states need to have these conversations at what they think is best for them. But everything's on the table. Let's talk about them. Let's find resolution around it, but everything's on the table.
I mean, regarding the question about civil suits changing things, I mean, not really, because a lot of the civil suits don't survive. I mean, because of what Justin was talking about. You know, most of them get tossed on qualified immunity because the judge just tossed the cases. Or, you know, what happens a lot behind the scenes is the cities or the mayors or the city attorneys will just throw the police officer away and say, okay, he messed up. Your client's dead, but we're not covering him. We're not going to pay insurance for him. We're not going to indemnify him, so you can have him. And then they just walk away. And so it's like a dog chasing its tail, because the cities are allowed to just run away from the officer if they want. And the families are just left with nothing. So that's why it's such a myth that lawyers who do civil rights cases do it for the money. That's ridiculous, because you don't get paid. I mean, 9 out of 10 times, you're just doing it because it's, you know, it's like I said earlier, it needs to be done and somebody has to fight these cases. The real problem is, you know, the power that a lot of the unions do have. You know, they will, like Dr. Alexander said, they'll get a police officer reinstated. Or city council or the mayor are so scared of them that they will get the vote out and get them out of office, that they'll just, you know, be quiet and not do the right thing. And so, like I said, it's about power and about, you know, people just refusing change because it would diminish their power.
So Chris, to follow up on that, how do we educate the people so that they understand when you go to the ballot box, you have all of this stuff on the ballot, right? You have prosecutorial discretion on the ballot. You have people that will fight the unions on the ballot. And I don't think people think about that when they go vote. They just see a RRD and no one's really, there's no marketing around or campaigning around this stuff being on the ballot. What do we do to address that?
The most important elections are local elections. I don't care who's president. I mean, I guess, you know, it's just Trump was on TV, you know, all the time. So you paid attention to him more than normal, but I don't care. I mean, because, you know, that's general stuff that will trickle down at some point. But you know who I care about? Who's the mayor and who's my DA, who's the police chief in my direct city? Because they make immediate stuff that you'll see the next day.
Right.
But nobody goes vote for like local elections like that, which is, you know, crazy. I've had DAs tell me, yeah, that cop messed up, but I'm not going to prosecute him because I won't get reelected. Like, what in the hell? Like, I mean, that's, you know, like that's how it is. And so it matters. You have to have people who will fearlessly go after a case. I mean, Joyette was, you know, prosecuting Arbery, and I know people didn't want her to do that, but she did. And so you have to have people in office, mayors, police chiefs, that actually care about doing their job, you know, without fear of re-election.
All right. Well, this has been a terrific panel. Joe, you want to jump in and close us out here?
Sure. And thank you again to all of our panelists, as well as to Bakari for jumping in to moderate this panel. Thank you to Attorney Joyette, Attorney Stewart, Attorney Miller, as well as Dr. Alexander. This was an excellent panel, and you guys did a great job. I'd like to give a quick special shout out to Keith Lamar for his assistance in securing some of the panelists for this panel, as well as all of the brothers of the Emerging 100 of Atlanta for pushing this event so that we could have a great turnout on the heels of an event that they put on and a panel they put on last Thursday. That was a great turnout as well. So thank you to everyone involved. Shoot it back to you, Kevin.
So if anyone wants to catch up on this panel or the one that the Emerging put on, it's on our YouTube channel, the 100 Black Men of Atlanta YouTube channel, or you can go to our Facebook page, and all of the information and the panel discussions are there. We've done one on the Ahmaud Arbery case back in May. We've done one on wrongfully incarcerated people, and now we've done this one. So if you want to check that out, check out our YouTube page. And on behalf of the 100 Black Men of Atlanta, our members, our board, our team, thank each panelist for your participation today. Again, this has been a lively discussion, and we wanted to educate. We have some of our college students on, our high school students on, and just educating folks on some of the stuff that's going on in the community with leaders like you all telling your story, telling it from your perspective, and we could have a nice, fair, and balanced discussion here and see both sides of the issue. So thank you very much for that. We appreciate you all being here tonight, and that is a wrap. If you have a moment, stay tuned for a quick 2-minute video about the 100 Black Men in our work. We would love you to support us. If you like what we're doing in the community, please support us. It's the end of the year, so we'd be happy to be great stewards of your investments. And OT, run the video, sir. Hello, everyone. Kevin Gooch here. Thank you for your time today. I wanted to talk to you a little bit about the work of the 100 Black Men of Atlanta, Inc. We are a 34-year-old organization that focuses on mentoring and making a difference in the community. We are a volunteer-led member organization with a roster that begins with Hammer and Hank Aaron and ends with Ambassador Young. And we have a lot of legends and titans of industry in between. And the common theme amongst these men is that we all came together to lock arms and truly make a difference to impact our community through mentoring, because what they see is what they will be. We appreciate all of the support that we've received throughout the years and in 2020. But unfortunately, we've had to cancel 3 of our biggest fundraisers for the year. That would be our 100 Honors, the Celebration Bowl, and Divots and Divas. And so as an organization, we need your help. We need more help. If you want us to continue to provide the programming that we've been delivering to our young people, if you want us to continue to deliver on that promise that we've made to positively impact the community by making a difference in the lives of the young people in these communities that are often left behind, these vulnerable young people, please, please support our organization. You can go to our website, you can make a donation there, you can connect with our members, you can call our office, and we will be happy to have you in the fold with us, supporting us, investing in us, so that we can do the same for the young people that we serve in this community that we serve. So again, thank you for your time. Thank you for your support. This has been a great, phenomenal panel. And we look forward to doing it again in the new year with some additional content. Thank you to each panelist. We are forever indebted to you, and we appreciate you. And have a great week, everyone, and stay safe.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.